List is now open for anyone to take a call on the recommendations on this issue. If I'll wait for a assembly period of time, otherwise I'll put the motion. Oh. Okay, yeah. I thought that might provoke a few people into taking the call. Councillor Quacks,
it did provoke me, but Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful for the questions and so forth that we had so far, and I would just like to, at this point, with Councillor Lee's permission, of course, to have Councillor Lee added to the group of the Mayor's Advisory, group. Given the human capital involved in this, the amount of work that Councillor Lee has already put into this, I was wondering, with your indulgence, Mr. Chair, if we could add, and of course with Councillor Lee's permission, if we could add him to that list. You're good with that, Mike?
No.
That's moving,
I reckon. The contribution I have to make in reply to that, Councillor, is that the agency that is doing the design work is unlikely to be able to work in that environment. Can I put it that way?
What?
Well, that's...
What?
They pick our members?
What?
There is a reason why the agency walked away from this committee. And if we are to adopt their design, we have to have a working environment in which they can work.
I have no idea, excuse me, Councillor Quacks, I have no idea what you're talking about. Because we have to, our decisions are based on the evidence presented to us in the report.
Mr. Chairman, was there a speaking order?
Yes, there is a speaking order. And Councillor Quacks, you've finished.
Well, yes, and look, if perhaps we should, there needs to be a separate amendment then, because I think in the end it would be the decision of this governing body whether we want Mike Lee to represent us, not just the decision made by one individual. So I would like to then add an additional or an amendment that Councillor Lee, Mike Lee, be added to the Mayor's Advisory Group to oversee the fundraising initiatives. And I would be looking for a seconder for that.
Well, I'm happy to second that for you, Councillor.
Speak to the amendment.
Okay, we have an amendment in front of us, so we now have speakers to the amendment. Are there any speakers to the amendment? Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As one of the members of the Domain Committee, I don't feel at all impugned. I'm actually very pleased that this is going to happen. And in speaking to this amendment, the reason I'm pleased is because, I know this is a public meeting, but we need to be upfront here. The chairman of the committee, who is the subject of this amendment, so we need to just talk about it, spoke very disparagingly of the designers. So I can understand completely why he shouldn't be on the committee, on the steering group. Very disparagingly. I won't say the actual words. And the other thing about the environment that's created is that I felt very unsafe in that environment. You couldn't speak if you had concerns, which I had huge concerns. And at one stage, I had the chairman saying words, no, 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 all the way through speaking my concerns. And so that is the reason I think it's not a good addition, because we need to get on with this. We don't need to be, pussyfooting around. And I think, I'll speak for myself, but I felt like it was on eggshells in the committee, that we couldn't say what we really felt. And so I don't think the addition of the suggested person on the committee will help It will not move this forward. We have to move it forward. And the feelings of one or two of us that aren't on the committee is nothing compared to the feelings and the suffering of mothers that lost their sons. And so I'm going to put any feelings that I have aside around whether I'm on the committee or not, I'm going to put them aside because it doesn't matter. What really matters is that we just get on with this. And whether it be an Armistice Day or on Peace Day, we need to hurry up and we need to get on with it. So I don't want any more impediments to that. We've had too much mucking around and it needs to be done. Thank you. That's why I won't support the amendment.
Thank you. Any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Watson, to the amendment.
Yes, I do. Just speaking to the amendment and of course reserving my right to speak to the substantive motion, Mr Mayor. I thank Councillor Quacks and Councillor Sayers for putting up that amendment. There was a bit of talk recently about respect and moving on and recognition and all those highly desirable traits that are meant to be reflected in our decision making, and I think this amendment gives the ability for that to occur. Anyone with a passing interest or knowledge of Councillor Lee, whether you like him or you dislike him, it's irrelevant, knows that this man has a passion for this project and for Auckland generally, but in particularly for Auckland's heritage and Auckland's history. And that was particularly evident for a number of the councillors, Councillor Quacks and myself included, who were fortunate enough to sit on the World War I steering committee, which was in existence for 3 years during the term of the last council. And on a monthly basis, Councillor Lee was by far and away the most valuable, if we're going to be honest, seeing people are being honest, most valuable contributor to not only this particular project but to the commemoration of World War I generally. I don't want to personalise things, but it's been very clear to me, very disappointingly so, that Councillor Lee has been treated with a little less cordiality than one would hope for some time, and not least of which is in the public media. I don't want to go there. I just want to speak to my fellow councillors to do the right thing here. You know what Mike's passion is for this memorial. You know how much work he's put into it. Whether you agree with him or whether you like him and other things, that's immaterial. You know that in this instance, this man is going to make a contribution to this, and to suggest that somehow people couldn't work in this realigned committee with a new chair and new personnel, I think is rather stretching credibility a bit. He's one person, just as he was one person in that committee. I don't think they were getting taken outside to face a firing squad for speaking, were they? We weren't in a World War I detention camp. So I would just urge people to do the right thing here, be fair, and vote for Councillor Lee to go on this committee.
Right. Further speakers? Councillor Mike Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is not my idea, and I haven't discussed it with the other members. However, I'm willing to accept. But I just want to make a point. I am concerned at the personal attack made on me by Councillor Cooper, and she's owned up that it is personal. Councillor Cooper was not at the meeting, the Domain Committee meeting of 12th of December, when we had a long workshop and made a series of decisions. She was not at the meeting of the 28th of February when we met with Wraith Hatfield. She was at the meeting of 12th of April. Again, that was preceded by quite a long workshop, and I think Councillor Hulse was at that meeting as well. Regardless of what Councillor Cooper thinks of me, and I'm aware since I was the chairman of the Auckland Regional Council, she really hasn't had too much of a good word to say about me. But those decisions, including Councillor Cooper at the very end, were carried without dissent. And I'll leave it at that. That speaks for itself.
Right. Are there any further comments on this amendment? Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a bit of a personal struggle here, and I'm going to ask you a question, and I think it's appropriate in dealing with this amendment. And that is, will this project go ahead as this paper outlines if Councillor Lee is on the new committee?
How dare,
If I can reserve my answer to that question to when I take the call, I'll certainly address that question. Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This project is such a worthy one, but it has not been without its controversy from the very beginning, when a decision was taken out at the Legacy Manukau Council that the council would involve itself with this. Right the way through, though, it has enjoyed the input from Councillor Lee. I can understand that there has been a breakdown in the relationship between Councillor Lee and Ray Thurfield, but I think with careful leadership by yourself in terms of the oversight from the governing body, the two can be separated, and I don't see it as being detrimental to the project going forward. And I certainly, if I am to be on that working party, will ensure that the project proceeds. But the valuable contribution, and Councillor Lee is a wonderful historian. He's very good at helping with that institutional memory on issues. I see him making a contribution here, and I don't know that it is going to be to the detriment of the project. But I think it is going to require careful leadership by yourself to make sure that the integrity of the design that went out for consultation and was selected does proceed. So I think we're all put in a slight quandary on this, but my preference would be that Councillor Lee is included, and I think Councillor Lee has the maturity to understand that he can't relitigate issues that were undertaken in the former in the Auckland Domain Committee. But I believe the respect that he has shown to war veterans, the work that he has undertaken over many years, should not be ignored, and he has a contribution to make. And I know that that is the view of David McGregor, who is also somebody who is being proposed to be part of this working group. So I hope that members can support this.
Any further comments? Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be voting against this motion. I don't dispute that Councillor Mike Lee has done a lot of good work in the council and previously, but I just think this needs a new beginning. I've heard some concerning things from people over the last few months, and I think it's time for a fresh start for the committee, and just to get this over and done with, and you know, in a good way forward. So I'll be voting for the original motion of the numbers, and to be clear, the other people, the other local board members chose that way. So Pipakum chose Shale as the Waitapata local board member that would be representative. None of them were thrown off or anything like that. So, yeah.
Quite correct. Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Mr. Chair, Your Worship, I've known Councillor Lee for many years now, and he and I have had some really ding-dong debates on policy issues, because he and I have been in different fora representing different interests, and he debates his point of view with vigour and with passion. And I have been very frustrated on occasion with the tenacity of his advocacy, but I am deeply admiring of my colleague, who I think adds tremendous depth and context, and is a very formidable historian, as has been expressed by Councillor Fletcher. This is a project that I don't believe anyone wants to see not happen. And I believe that it's time for all the adults in the room to stand up and allow that to happen. And I'm quite sure by reflecting a positive and affirming view to Councillor Quacks's offer to participate, that the person who has been nominated, along with those people who have been proposed in the recommendations of the primary item, will absolutely commit to working to get this project over the line. I didn't intend to speak on this, but I have been uncomfortable with the undertones of this debate. So I will be voting for the amendment, and I would hope that it will be received. I hope that colleagues will vote for it, even if they don't necessarily like Mike Lee. He is a person who I think should be afforded the courtesy and respect. If he's willing to serve, he should be supported in that aspiration.
Thank you. Councillor Kathy Casey.
Well, I'm still reeling from the Mayor's pronouncement that Raith Artfield couldn't work if Mike Lee was on the committee. Did I hear that right? Is that what you said?
I'm happy to address that when I take my call, Councillor.
But you did say that.
I'm happy to address that when I take my call.
Well, can I just remind the Mayor, maybe he's only been here a year, but Raith Artfield doesn't actually tell us who goes on our committees, okay? We do. You don't. You propose them to us and we tell you what we like, and this is what I like about this particular decision here. This governing body is telling you that we respect Mike Lee and the work he's done, and we'd like to see him continue his work.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. I'm supportive of this, and that's quite objectively, because if I ask myself on the basis of merit, who is a great fit, frankly, Mike ticks all the boxes: expertise, passion, application, experience, insight, and we all know that. So why wouldn't you? Mike has also shown leadership around following through on the design brief, the original design brief. What's wrong with that? It was actually the architect that determined to throw that to the wind. That's not Mike's fault. And I'm quite convinced that we can find a way forward, and I'd like Mike to be a part of that. So I go back to my point on merit. Mike ticks all the boxes, and we should be somewhat objective around decisions like this.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pennyholes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the chance to speak to this. Often when we take a vote by division, you don't get a chance to explain this. I'm not going to be supporting the amendment, and I'd just like to explain briefly why. I'm very uncomfortable that this has become a vote for Mike Lee or not vote for Mike Lee. I think that's extremely unfortunate and places us in an invidious position. Councillor Lee and I have been around for roughly the same time in local government, and we've worked closely and well on many issues. We've also had many debates, but my respect for Mike is absolute. This, however, I think for me, I will be voting against the amendment out of respect for your position on trying to resolve this very thorny and long standing issue. I think this is a new beginnings approach, and in the same way that Councillor Fletcher very kindly offered to add my name to the working party on housing, I've done my dash on that. I've had my input, and it's time for fresh eyes, fresh faces and fresh experience to take over. And I think this mirrors it. I in no way took that as casting aspersions on my leadership or capability. It's just every now and again we need to know when to step out of the arena and let other people take over. So, Mr Mayor, I do understand the position that this places you in, and for that reason I won't be supporting the amendment.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Any other councillors wishing to take the call? If not, Councillor Simpson.
Sorry, I just want to sort of support what Councillor Hulse is saying. I mean, I have a huge respect for Councillor Lee, and I was on the Domain Committee.
That's the case.
But in protecting him, Your Worship, you're kind of opening the can of worms. And I'm not sure, I think I know what I know, and I don't know how you're gonna answer this, because I think it sounds as if this is against his integrity or his ability to chair, and this is a public session, so my question is, good luck to you in trying to handle it. But I know what I know, and I've asked a question, you haven't yet answered it. Somehow you're going to have to answer it, just so people don't think it's personal, and it's not.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Well, I'll take that opportunity to take the call myself. The first point I want to make is that the decision as to who goes on to this committee is for this council and this council alone. You make the decision, and nobody is telling you from outside what decision you should make. That's what our democratic system is about. Secondly, there is nothing personal in my opposition to Councillor Lee going on this committee. I actually respect Councillor Lee's commitment to our veterans and our war memorial services for years. I've been going to those services at the museum, whether it's Armistice Day or Passchendaele or whatever, and I see Mike Lee there, and I respect him for that. But to answer Councillor Simpson's question, when I approached Rate Athfield as to why they walked away from this design and from this project, I said, why did you do it? You're the best landscape architects of war memorials in this country. You've done Pukeahu in Wellington. You've done the Cenotaph Parliamentary Memorial in Wellington. You designed the New Zealand War Memorial in London. There is nobody better than these people. And we chose your design. Why have you walked away? And they gave me an honest answer. They said it was an irreconcilable breakdown in our relationship with Chairman Mike Lee. And we felt that we could not continue to go on working with Chairman Lee. They weren't holding me to ransom. They weren't telling me what to do. They were giving me an explanation as to why they made their decision. And I relay that to you so that you can take that into account. The answer to your question, Councillor Simpson, I don't know. I don't know whether they would stay associated with this project in the event that we put Councillor Lee on. But I want a fresh start for this committee. I want to make sure we can deliver for Auckland and get the money and get this process working carefully. And I've approached a range of people to be part of the steering group that are broadly representative of those with interests in this area. And I haven't sought to exclude the people that were nominated before. But I am working on the advice that I have when I ask the question to the designers, why did you walk away? I'm obliged to tell you that because you need to have that information in the vote that you now make. So I think we should have this vote by division.
Can I ask you a question, Mr Mayor?
No, you can't. Understanding orders, I'm sorry. We've had the time for questions. We have now completed this debate.
This is about who they is. Did you talk to one people or did you talk to a whole room of people? No, was it one person?
I talked to the Auckland and the Wellington representatives of that organisation. So I'm going to suggest that we take by division a vote on the amendment moved by Councillor Quacks. So if I can ask our officials now to do the roll call.
Mayor Goff.
Against.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Darby.
Against.
Councillor Filipaina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Hills.
Against.
Councillor Hulse.
Against.
Councillor Denise Lee.
Against.
Councillor Mike Lee.
For.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Quacks.
For.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson.
With regret, against.
Councillor Stewart.
Against.
Councillor Sir John Walker. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
It's lost 9-11.
The vote has been lost 9-11. So we now return to the substantive discussion around the recommendations in the report, and I am looking for people wanting to speak on that. Councillor Casey.
Question.
Yeah. I can't help but think that this is exactly what I promised would happen, that this call-in public would impugn certain members sitting around this table, would personalise it, and that's exactly what has happened. I think the call-in process is disrespectful and humiliating, and I'm sorry that I've had to be a part of that, but I will ask members here to vote entirely against the resolutions as proposed. When we, through the governance review framework, talked about call-in, there are good legal reasons why a governing body can't call in the decisions of local boards. But in the discussions with local boards, I'll express some of the opinions I heard, which was it would be totally outside of your authority to tell us what to do. It would be like Big Brother stomping all over us. That's what this is. This isn't Parliament. This is not the way we do things. And, you know, to be honest, I've seen a couple of things in the last year that I'm not proud of watching, and part of that was taking councillors off the Auckland Transport Board, one of whom was Councillor Mike Lee, the other was Councillor Christine Fletcher. The way it was done, the way the media got it first, you know, I never leak. I never leak. But every time we have a substantial issue, it seems that Bernard Orsman gets it first, from whichever direction. So Parliament's a bear pit, but I've always thought we were better than that. This does not help. The idea that any time the mayor can call in something he doesn't like because somebody's in his ear from Wellington or Auckland or wherever your designer's from, really, really saddens me. To hear that out loud today in a public forum really saddens me. To hear other councillors being disrespectful about the way somebody chairs. We might say that in a workshop, we might say it behind closed doors or over the water cooler, but to say it right now in front of Auckland is entirely disrespectful. So that's my issue today, is the process is not one that I'm proud to be part of. It's not one that I support, and I think that we should express that disappointment today by not supporting these resolutions. As for the report that came before us, there were 2 paragraphs in there that were quite simply, well, they weren't wrong, but they were completely missing a whole heap of information. So, in effect, the story was not told, nor has the story been told, because you still haven't seen the information that the Domain Committee saw to make their decisions. And you still don't really know that the Domain Committee, you've heard today, but you don't really know, because it should have been in the report, how many meetings the Domain Committee had, how many workshops, who attended. We've got all that information, and what was discussed. I've seen the report that went to the workshop from the staff. So the staff brought options, the Domain Committee accepted some of the options and moved forward. And then, for some reason, it's all gone to custard because somebody got in the mayor's ear. That's not the way I want to do this ever again.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I guess the options become a little bit more limited now. I appreciate Councillor Quacks for trying to come to some more amicable settlement moving forward. That hasn't happened, and it would appear, despite all the comments to the contrary, that Rate Athfield, whoever those individuals may be, now seem to be the ones calling the shots in this matter, despite everything that was said. We've been urged to as the old cliches go, to move on and to look forward and all the rest of it. I hope you won't mind, Mr Mayor, if I don't do that just yet. I'd like to just perhaps reflect a little bit like the hearth. I assume it's got a few seats there where you can sit down and reflect on World War I and the losses and all the rest of it. I'd just like to reflect briefly on this process today, because I think that's important. There's a danger here in the speed of moving on, is to actually overlook what happened. And I wasn't involved in that committee. I was on the steering committee, but had no real involvement in the memorial. But I have taken some time to look at the details, and I hope in an objective way. And I think that examination will certainly determine my vote in the end. And I would have to say at the outset, Mr. Mayor, that there's a marked contrast between the way this has evolved and the way things were panning out in the previous term of council, with both the steering committee and the War Memorial Working Party, which had a great degree of goodwill and cooperation and positivity. And this should be a positive thing. I mean, at the moment it's starting to resemble some of the worst disasters of World War I. It's like another Gallipoli in terms of communication. It's that bad. So something that should be a cause of celebration has turned into one of vitriol, of personal attack, and of bending to the whims and wishes of an absent third party, who probably none of us, except perhaps the Mayor, have met. This process, I guess, started in its most basic sense when we passed the resolution in 2016, basically endorsing the hearth, or the hearth, however you pronounce it, which wasn't my choice. I mean, to be honest, I saw it less impressive, but that's what people decided upon. And that was passed, but it was passed with the proviso, and that's a proviso that hasn't been mentioned too much, and that was to refine the design in accordance with the brief and to come up with this suitable and subtle way of connecting the feature. That was the key brief that was given out both to the Working Party initially, and then subsequently taken up by the Auckland Domain Committee. And interestingly enough, at the start, Rate, Athfield, they had no problems with that. They were on board with that. If you look at the communications, they recognised the desire for this pathway and a degree of subtlety and all the rest of it, and that they seem to be working towards that. When we moved to the new council, in this term of council, then things seem to change a bit. We have a domain committee which has 7 members, and despite the allegations of people being frightened and not speaking up and not being able to do this or that, 7 people were on that committee. When I looked through the resolutions, they were all passed unanimously. I find it hard to believe that one person, and I know Councillor Lee wears his big coat, but I don't think it was hardly Napoleon, but Bonaparte, could exert that sort of influence. So that just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. But what does emerge from that is this quite serious disagreement over this pathway. Our domain committee, they come up with this notion of a direct path, 4 metres wide, reinforced grass, to preserve that green space, which has been foremost in all the public commentaries, to preserve the integrity of that, but at the same way to allow this procession up the central pathway there to the museum. Rate Anfield had a difficulty with that. So they came back, and this is something that I haven't heard mentioned. Their proposal for that was this pathway, rather than the subtle kind of version that was part of the brief, was just over 42 metres wide, over 10 times the width of the committee, connected with a similar length 42 metre concrete transitions at the Court of Honour and Domain Drive to reflect the interruption of war.
Extension of time for you to continue. It's been moved an extension of time.
Second.
All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no.
So
carried.
So if we're getting to the
2 minutes
to the heart of the
1.5 minutes
disagreement here, they came back with this proposal that was totally contrary to the brief. and was well over double the price. So we have the Domain Committee trying to follow the brief and trying to restrict the cost to Auckland Council, and they're the ones who've been thrown to the wolves here. How does that work? How does the committee that was doing what it had been delegated to do, which was following governing body resolutions, how is it that they are the ones that are now being dismembered here? And their chair thrown out for public, vilified and thrown out for public ridicule. That's not fair, and it does not reflect what actually happened. So we have in the same way as history is sometimes rewritten, we have an attempt here to rewrite what actually happened and what is actually reflected in the resolutions, if you have read those resolutions. So, Mr. Mayor, we've come now to what's before us now is this Mayor's Committee. You know, a number of them have fallen by the wayside, you know, casualties of battle, I might say. But we have these series of revocations that really cast aspersions on the work of the steering committee, the initial working party, and the Domain Committee. So at this point, and despite the good intentions of Councillor Quacks, the only option open to people that actually looked at what happened and have some degree of objectivity here, I would hope, is to actually vote this down. If it was up to me, it would be going back to the Domain Committee.
Councillor, you've
they were doing their job as we had instructed them to do.
Councillor, you've exhausted your time. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, look, sometimes governance does get in the way, and in my view, governance has got in the way of delivering the project as the governing body would have expected. But there's one thing I've learned very early on is that if you want to create an outstanding project, the governors write the brief, confirm the brief, and then make sure the brief is reflected through designs. You don't go and get in the way by redesigning. I don't have any skill in that area, and I don't know an architect, an urban designer, or a landscape architect that sits around this table. But from the information that I've seen, that interference has occurred. And I'm not getting personal here, because in some ways I'm talking about the whole of the Domain Committee here. I have heard some comments just made by Councillor Watson, which I'd have to contend with outright regarding the design. There is an attachment here, attachment B, Mr. Mayor. It hasn't been referred to by staff today, but here it's on the report, and I would assume people have read that attachment. I'm always been a big fan of making sure that the right people assess design, not those in governance. We have the Auckland Urban Design Panel, and this project finally made it to that Urban Design Panel. It should have been a lot earlier. The Auckland Domain Committee should have referred it a lot earlier. Should have either gone to the Major Projects Review Team or the Urban Design Panel. The Urban Design Panel that considered this in July is made up of Professor John Hunt, David Mead, well known to us, from Hill Young Cooper, Diane Menzies, I don't know. I know Will Thresher, a well-known landscape architect. A good mix of people there. Urban designers, architect, and John Hunt, in fact, professor at the was professor at the Architecture School. Members, I invite you to read through what the Urban Design Panel said on this project. They actually backed Rate Atfield's design entirely and made some small recommendations. It's a pity, Mr. Mayor, I should have brought it up before, but I probably would have put an amendment there, or that we actually accept or at least receive the Auckland Urban Design Panel recommendations. Though that job on design now does not belong to the governing body post these resolutions, and it does not belong to the steering group. That job now belongs to the Chief Executive, and I think that's the proper place where the Chief Executive can ensure that professionals are dealing with the design decisions, not those in governance, because that has been a failing. I'd like to just point out that the advisory group, their responsibility is to deal with fundraising, stakeholder management and communications, and that this governing body will continue to enjoy oversight of governance of the project overall. with a CE delegated responsibility for design. It's a pity it's got to this, but this has been a pretty sad unfolding of what should have been and still can be an outstanding project. I just want to say something. People have been quick to say this is all got personal. The name Athfield Architects has been mentioned. The name Rate Architecture has been mentioned. That makes up Rate Athfield, the consortium. I have high regard for both that architectural firm and that landscape architecture firm. They have both separately delivered significant projects in this country and beyond this country. Behind the name Athfield Architects is probably one of the most outstanding architects in this nation's history, in Ian Athfield. There are many others, of course, but he is revered by the architect community. His culture, the culture of his organisation, is out of Ian Athfield, and it lives pretty strongly. The principal architect, and I'm not going to mention him by name, I know him well from Athfield Architects. I worked with him on the hugely successful Devonport Library project, which was contentious in that community. And I have not come across an architect who was prepared to go the course and really genuinely listen to a community that was criticising design. The design was amended, it was landed, and it's one of the most successful and much-loved projects in the library space. I have got a lot of respect for Athfield Architects and Rate Architecture, as does evidence before us by the Urban Design Panel. The Urban Design Panel does not support an axial pathway, and the list goes on. It's pretty sad that this has come to this, Mr. Mayor, but you are right to call this in. You are right to take control, and I think Aucklanders expect us to be decisive and to take control. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So a bit of a challenging day, and particularly this afternoon, folks. The Urban Design Panel is there to do a job, as Councillor Darby has said. They're the professionals, and they've made some recommendations. To me, when you look at Te Tukuahai, it's about that celebration that can be built in time. It's about the ability to deliver this project on time for the right celebration and within a budget. We now can do this. You have the opportunity to confirm the members of a committee to help deliver this project with some of the backing that it requires in other areas. We are the governors, we are not the managers, and that difference needs to be distinct. So the governance role here is about making a decision to deliver this project for all the people who lost their family members in World War I. And we all would have members like that now, grandparents, uncles and aunts. That's what this is about, a contemplative hearth. So, councillors, it is about Te Tukuahai now. A lot of individuals around this table. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Bill Cashmore. Councillor Wayne Walker.
No.
Councillor Fesso Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I want to put out front that I will be supporting this recommendation. One of the reasons why I was happy to second the procedural motion that Councillor Casey moved earlier was because the report to me looked like it was missing information. I'm very slowly working through a thesis. And my supervisor says to me all the time, Efeso, I can't understand the logic. You've ended up at one place, but you haven't taken me through every step so that I know how we got there. That's what I felt towards the report. And it wasn't until you've made some public comments today and some of your answers, Mr. Mayor, that I began to get a much bigger picture of what was happening. So I'm happy to endorse the recommendation as it is, but I'm sad, being someone on the quality advice group, that we get a report that, in my view, doesn't have all the information. Item on the report, part 23 says project governance and gives us some real vague ideas of what that issue is. And that's not good enough for me. And sure, I didn't get the letter that came from the CEO to his office to your office, but it may have gone a little way in at least helping me to understand where we got to. And the fact that a member had to be named and alongside ideas that some groups might not or may not work with them, I think gets to the point where it could in fact feel like it's disparaging of that member, or as another councillor said today, could impugn that member. And I don't think we needed to get to that if the report, for me, was a bit more wholesome, was a bit more fulsome and gave me a bit more information. I want this project to go ahead. And I know it's been a very telling debate for many of the councillors this afternoon, and I'm going to endorse the project, but I wanted to outline what some of my anxieties were, because in my view, the report was not complete. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. If there's no... Oh, Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. This has taken time today, and I think it's actually a good thing that it has taken time. This is a most significant issue for Aucklanders past, Aucklanders now, and Aucklanders into the future. Could I say, firstly, that we would not have had a budget, we would not have had a project, but for Mike Lee, Cameron Brewer, who I'd like to acknowledge today, Sandra Coney, and, if I may, myself. We were the drivers for actually taking the issue to the Mayor of the time, Len Brown, and argued vociferously for the need to go ahead with this. Now, he said, and he was quite prophetic really, he said, oh, it'll become terribly controversial. Well, yes, it has, but that shouldn't have us shy away from doing the right thing for all of those who made sacrifices during the First World War. I was particularly passionate about being involved in this project from the very beginning because I had a great aunt who was like a grandmother to me. She didn't have children, and she had been a Red Cross nurse who'd got on a ship, had no idea. She'd gone through the training. In those days, you trained as a nurse in Gisborne, and she'd jumped on a ship despite her parents' concern, and she ended up in the midst of the First World War, so absolutely ill-equipped to deal with the absolute trauma she saw. It stayed with her for the rest of her life, and she was one of the few that were decorated, but on every occasion, she was the one that took me to Anzac Day every year, but towards the end of her life, she wanted to go into Ranfurly War Veterans Home, and I took her in, and to this day I'm ashamed of my response to her. They turned her down because she was a woman, and she cried all of the way home, and I didn't understand the depth of her despair. So I'm sorry, if I could have a little bit more speaking time. I'm not sure what that bell...
that wasn't our...
No,
it was somebody's phone.
Somebody's bell.
Mr Mayor, it's very distracting. People should have their phones on silent.
So it was important to me that we had some place where the men and the women and the children and everybody that had hurt could come together, and their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren could actually contemplate what had occurred. Now, nobody has been more formidable in the advocacy of this than Mike Lee. And I say, as a member of the Working Party, that I'll still continue to collaborate with Mike because he's just so incredibly passionate about these issues. But there's a couple of things I want to correct very quickly. For those of you who say that those in governance shouldn't have any place in design, could I put it to you that this project is as good as it is, and I will defend it, because of the input by the governors at the time. And if I take you back to Britomart, and I've got the pleasure of being able to say I did work with Professor John Hunt. I appointed him to chair the first urban design panel for the Auckland City Council. He was involved in the competition that we had on Britomart, as was Ian Affield. I worked closely with Ian, and both Ian and John, whom I would like to call friends, Ian's passed on now, they would have loved the fact that we are having fierce debate over this, because good things come out of good debate and openness. And I think that it's therefore important that we have had an open debate today. The real issues here going forward, we've heard. It's the issues about the completion date, the issue around notification or non-notification, and I'm heartened that that will be within the purview of the working party. And I think finally, the challenge of actually getting the fundraising for this off the ground. We can't make it about any of us personally. This is about a project for all of Auckland, all of New Zealand and all of our visitors. And I know that Mike Lee will be as keen as all of us to see the project concluded properly, that it can be a place of contemplation. And I look forward to working with Mike, whether he's on the working party or whether he's not, because he has a fine mind, he is a good historian, and he knows the importance of actually pausing to reflect on our history. So, Mr. Chairman, Your Worship, I will do my best on this working party, but I hope that we can go into it with an open mind, knowing that we have the right project. The project is there, that's not up for litigation. The real challenge for the working party is going to be the fundraising. So I look forward to working with all of the groups on that, and yourself, but knowing that there are many others that we can call on, and I shouldn't let the moment pass without saying how lucky we are to have David McGregor as part of this group. David is very keen to be involved. He was also very keen to continue to work with Mike, and I know that he, like myself, will continue to work with Mike offline rather than necessarily online, but I think the project is worthy, it needs to proceed, and I would like people to vote for it today.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Mike Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is not a happy occasion for me, and in my 25 years or more experience in local government, it's quite unprecedented. I go back to the start of 1992, which even predates Sir Bob Harvey in local government, so a little bit longer even than Councillor Holt.
No, same time, 1992 for Bob and me. Yep. Just saying.
The personal nature of the discussion, I guess, has become unavoidable. Hearsay comments have been admitted to the debate by the chair, which is disappointing. But hey, I'm not so worried about that. What I am worried about is good process, democratic, local government, the management of our affairs in a just and humane way, and going by the book, through duly lawful democratic resolutions. That's what I feel is under threat today. Councillor Watson made the point, and something that I notice the Mayor seems to studiously avoid, and even the worthy people in the Auckland Urban Design Panel and Councillor Darby studiously avoid, is that in February 2016, the governing body selected Te Takawahi. I have to say the process was not as ideal for a number of reasons as it could have been. The design favoured by a committee of 15 staff members was called Te Korowai, and it was by an equally illustrious Auckland architectural team. However, because of diagrams that were published in the media, which gave a very intrusive impression of landscaping on the green slopes of the domain, there was a public outcry, and I guess staff were fortunate to discover after some time that the cost of Te Korowai was over our budget, and therefore technically, despite they believing it was by far the best one, it was ruled out. So that's the background of it, but the governing body, in accepting second best, did point out, or did require an amendment to the design. So it was a conditional acceptance of a connecting pathway, And of course, as I've indicated, the connecting pathway was a key element of the design brief, and the design brief is commercially significant and needs to be respected because that's what all the competitors went out intended for. I don't accept the right of the urban design panel and whether it's appropriate for them to be urban designing the domain to redesign something that has gone out to the marketplace retrospectively 2 years later. But leaving that aside, that requirement to, what is the word here, include a suitable and subtle way of connecting the feature with the Auckland War Memorial Museum and Court of Honour was again confirmed at the last meeting of Mayor Brown in September 2016. Now, when the current Mayor came into office, he decided that the Domain Committee should do this job, which made some sense because the Domain Committee is the legal landowner, and I'm not too sure how these resolutions impact on that particular delegation and the rights of the landowner. But in December 2016, pretty soon after the new council was sworn in, we were given, the Domain Committee was convened, and we were given a briefing and a very long whiteboard session, and we were reminded that the current design brief remains paramount and provides some guidance to
Excuse me,
assist.
Councillor, I'll need to move an extension of time. I'll move that. It's been seconded. Those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried.
The current design brief remains paramount and provides some guidance to assist in the design of a connection. And so we got down to work to come up with to try and fulfil the democratic requirements, and Councillor Darby was there, of the governing body. We had a long session in December. We had another meeting in February, both of which Councillor Cooper, who apparently has a lot to say in criticism of me and my conduct of the committee, was not there. And I would note that of all the people in the governing body, Councillor Cooper was the one who opposed having any memorial at all. Anyway, and so acting on those recommendations or options provided by management, the Domain Committee, which, to remind you, is a very unique committee made up of governing body members, made up of Waitemata local board members, and made up of members of the Independent Maori Statutory Board, came down to a decision on a pathway suitable and subtle, which Raith Atfield would not accept. Now, there were a number of meetings, and a very congenial meeting, I remember, with Raith Atfield at the box with Mr Maxwell and Jane Aitken. And I was shown some diagrams, and what I was told was, we've heard what you've said and we can move forward. And I thought, great. But there appears to have been a misunderstanding because that they didn't hear or read what we were saying, and that became evident in February when the 42-metre suitable and subtle pathway at 4.6 million all up was presented to the committee. I don't know if they were serious or a game was being played, but the committee, firmly but politely, did not accept that, and I'm sure the governing body or the people of Auckland would not accept a 42-metre pathway up the green slopes of the domain, if you call it a pathway. It's wider than a motorway, up the domain, up the slopes of the domain. And so after that, the last thing I heard from Raith Atfield is what I read out earlier, that essentially their view or their concept of Te Takuahi, the hearth, was fundamentally in conflict with the design brief and the philosophy of the design brief, and not just in terms of the pathway, but the design brief implied or suggested that the new memorial feature was an addition, that Auckland already had a splendid war memorial, and what had to happen after that was something that would add to, would harmonise with, would complete, if you will, the War Memorial Museum complex of the splendid museum building, the Court of Honour and the Cenotaph. Raith Hadfield from Wellington thought that their concept needed to be respected in its own right and was separate, and they even went as far as saying that their intention was to physically disrupt the slopes to remind us how bad war is, which I don't think Aucklanders would have accepted, and that was the last I heard from them. When they refused to cooperate and we couldn't achieve what the governing body wanted by way of a pathway because of their refusal, then we, on recommendations of staff, we selected a simpler pathway approach with the recommendations exactly how management suggested they be, except I changed B, report this decision to the governing body for endorsement, noting that the governing body previously endorsed Te Takuahi with B, brief the mayor on this decision and report to the governing body for endorsement. I did brief the mayor. I mentioned to him verbally at one of our meetings over the bed tax, and I sent him a 3-page memorandum before Anzac Day, so he was up to date, up to speed with what had been going on over the last 3 months, in case anyone asked him. Unfortunately, I didn't get any acknowledgement. So then I heard from Councillor Simpson that the mayor had told his cabinet that the Domain Committee had spent $500,000, so I sent him the memorandum again with the staff assessment of how much money had been spent.
Councillor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're now coming close to 11 minutes. Can you just take a couple of minutes to wind up, please? I've given you quite a lot of latitude. I appreciate this is important to you, but can you please bring it to a conclusion? We still have the rest of the agenda to get through.
I have to say that what we have seen here is, and I guess it's from my experience in procurement in this council, which I was the procurement committee, which I have now resigned from, that this is a case again of not only a price increment, but also, as one of the members of this new advisory panel said to me, was consultant capture. There's just one more point I want to make, and that is the cost. Because can I say that the report from the officers is excellent? I can't quibble with it. And their interpretation is correct, except I would beg to differ on one small point, which is not actually wrong, but actually lacks information. The implication, and the mayor has actually said it, and it's incorrect, that the Lottery Grants Board grant of $655,000 was predicated on the Te Takuahi design. The council, that is incorrect, but there are two, apart from the normal routine conditions, there are two key conditions that this council should bear in mind from the Lottery Grants Board. The first one is that the council must provide 1/3 of the cost. So if it's cost $3 million, we've got to put up $1 million. If it goes higher, we have to go higher. We can't ask other people to go higher. That's the first key condition to remember, because it's not been mentioned or thought about. The other one is that we must have a resource consent. And what I am concerned about, and I go back to the report from Richmond Planning Limited to the council about the extreme importance and sensitivity of the site. And this is a report that sets out all the legal and planning requirements, which is not mentioned, but presumably came out of that money we talked about before. But when, in December, before we had our meeting, we all went up and met with Raith Atfield on site with Mr Maxwell. And until that time, and subsequent to that time, there's never been any information about the size of this feature, or how many, what the scale of earthworks would entail. But however, with Mr Maxwell and members of the committee and Raith Atfield, we paced out the size of it, and there's a 15-metre radius. That's from the centre to the outside of the circle. If you work the pi r squared to find out the area in metres of a circle, it's 704 square metres in area, which is a significant amount of concrete. Then there is the other dimension of cubic metres. How much earthworks would that entail? This is going to be a major disturbance of an archaeological, of a ethnological, of a geological feature of the highest importance. And so my message to you is, you know, I'm over all the insults and all the rest of it, and it is personal, there's no doubt about that, whether it's from the Mayor or from the person at the end of the phone in Raith Atfield. However, and I can tell you about that because it relates to some problems in Wellington of an environmental group in which
Councillor, you've now
a member of my family is leading. Leaving that aside, I would urge members to bear in mind not the urban design people proposing design stuff in our most important and sensitive park, but the people of Auckland. This is about the Auckland War Memorial Museum, it's about the domain, it's about the people of Auckland, and I think people in Wellington or people on some little urban design panel committee can take too much attention. The fact of the matter is we're a democratic organisation. This thing, if it ever happens, will be paid for one way or the other by the people of Auckland, and their rights and the domain and the Auckland War Memorial Museum has to be respected. Thank you very much. And that is why I'll be voting against these recommendations, which I think are an affront to democratic process, to resolutions that are lawful and totally unprecedented in my time in 25 years in regional government in Auckland. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we're ready to wind up now.
By division.
Questions?
I just want to make a couple of comments in reply, if I may. I haven't taken a call on this. I want to assure you, Councillor Lee, that there is nothing personal about this. I appointed you as chair of the Domain Committee, and I delegated to you the role of the World War I Memorial, and I did that out of respect for your contribution in the past. So there is nothing personal about this at all. I thank you for your acknowledgement of the official's report as being an accurate reflection of the situation. I just want to remind councillors that the reason that I have reluctantly intervened in this was I was faced with this position. We had no design for the memorial. We had no designer for the memorial. We had lost our opportunity to raise the funding necessary to complete the project. And I happen to think that the concept of the hearth and the need to commemorate those who suffered other than those that were on the battlefield themselves was an important way that we could commemorate the end of what was called the Great War. In that situation, it was an obvious reason why the matter needed to be called up to this council for a decision and to find a new way forward. Because I do want to achieve this memorial for Aucklanders and for those who suffered so much as a result of the war. I am confident that we can succeed. I thank the councillors that have cooperated in allowing their names to go forward, I want to say that I did not make any of those decisions to call it up lightly. I talked to staff. I talked to the Chief Executive. I talked to the members of the original political working group.
But not me.
And I talked to the Domain Committee.
No.
And on two...
Nonsense.
I did talk to individual members of the Domain
No,
Committee.
not-
And they...
After you'd made the decision.
Councillor, I listened to you for over 15 minutes without interrupting.
Tell the
I will
truth.
ask for some courtesy, including the unacceptability of your last comment. This is not a decision that has been made lightly, and it is not a decision that has been made without the full facts being put before all of you, so that you as the governing body can make this decision now. I think that Te Takuahi is an important project for us to complete. Equally, I think we need to acknowledge that the $1 million that was voted of ratepayer money ought to be the extent of the ratepayers' contribution. And this project is not yet a done deal until we can determine whether we can get access to the Significant Projects Fund of the Lotteries Commission, and until we can determine the level of philanthropic support that may exist to complete the project. And I want to acknowledge Councillor Chris Fletcher, and I want to acknowledge Brigadier David McGregor for offering to take a lead in that area of fundraising. I'm very grateful for your commitment and the commitment of David McGregor to it. I think you've heard the argument, you've heard it from all angles, and I think that everybody is now sufficiently informed to be able to cast their vote. Is there a request that this vote be by division? We will take it by...
Before we go on, I just want to ask what the implications will be around some of those recommendations. For example, recommendation A...
I'm sorry, Councillor, I'm sorry. The point for questions is over. We've had the debate now. Those were questions that should have been asked earlier. I'm happy to entertain those questions outside
This is not a question about the project. This is a question about process around what the implications are of voting for some of these particular amendments in here, or recommendations
sorry,
in here.
Councillor, the standing... Could you please listen while I make a ruling on this? The standing orders are clear that once we have ended the process for question time and we've ended the debate, there is no opportunity for further formal questions in the session. If you want me to get a ruling on that for you, I will.
I don't need a ruling on that, Mr. Mayor, but it does guide my...
I'm sorry. When I am speaking, I'll ask you to listen. I've made a ruling on that we are now proceeding to the vote. If there's things that you're so uncertain about that you can't vote for it, I understand. But we must follow standing orders. So I'll ask our officials now to take a vote on division.
And, Mr. Mayor, clarification?
You're not allowed to interrupt a vote, Councillor.
The vote is happening, I'm sorry.
This is...
No, you had the opportunity, Councillor. Could you please take the division?
Yes, councillors, you're voting on the recommendation as it is on the screen. Mayor Goff.
In favour.
Councillor Casey.
No.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipaina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Hills.
Yes.
Councillor Hulse.
Aye.
Councillor Mike Lee.
No.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Quacks.
For.
Councillor Sayers.
Against.
Councillor Simpson.
For.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
Councillor Sir John Walker.
For.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Against.
Councillor Watson.
Oh.
That's carried 14-5.
I declare that vote carried 14-5. We now